For 20 years, I believed I was lucky. That's the part that still embarrasses me. Not the betrayal. Not the money. Not the lies. The part that hurts the most is how grateful I was for all of it. Grateful for every birthday cake. Grateful for every family photo. Grateful for every hug at Christmas. Grateful for a bedroom that was never really mine, in a house that was never really safe, surrounded by people who smiled at me like love was something they had generously decided to give. My name is Ethan Miller. I am 30 years old. And until last year, if you had asked me who saved my life, I would have said my Aunt Linda and my Uncle Paul. I would have said it without hesitation. I would have told you they took me in after my parents died. I would have told you they raised me as their own. I would have told you my cousins, Megan and Josh, were more like siblings than cousins. I would have told you I owed them everything. And that was exactly what they wanted me to believe. Because debt is easier to collect when the person thinks it is love. I was 10 years old when my parents died. A truck ran a red light on a wet November evening and hit their car on the driver's side. My mother died at the scene. My father survived long enough to make it to the hospital. That detail haunted me for years. I used to imagine him lying there under bright emergency room lights, asking where my mother was, asking where I was, not knowing he would never come home. I had been at a friend's house that night. A sleepover. We were eating pizza rolls and playing video games when my friend's mother came into the room, with a face I had never seen before. She didn't say anything in front of him. She just said, "Ethan, honey, your aunt is here." Aunt Linda was standing in the hallway, crying. She hugged me so hard I couldn't breathe. Then she said, "There's been an accident." That sentence split my life in half. Before and after. After the funeral, everyone kept saying I was lucky to have family. "You're so lucky Linda and Paul can take you. You're lucky you don't have to go into the system. You're lucky you'll be with people who love you." Lucky. That word followed me everywhere. At 10 years old, I learned that grief was supposed to come with gratitude. I had lost my parents, my home, my routines, my entire world. But I was lucky. So I acted lucky. I moved into my aunt and uncle's house 2 towns over. They gave me the guest room, then painted it blue because my aunt said, "A boy needs a proper room." Uncle Paul built shelves for my books. Megan, who was 12, left a handmade sign on my door that said, "Welcome home, Ethan." Josh, who was 8, gave me half of his action figures and told me I could keep the cool ones. For the first few months, I cried almost every night. Aunt Linda would sit on the edge of my bed and rub my back. "You're safe here," she'd whisper. Uncle Paul would stand in the doorway, arms crossed, quiet but present. "Your family," he would say. And I believed him. God help me, I believed all of them. The first Christmas without my parents, Linda made my mother's old cookie recipe. She burned the first batch and cried in the kitchen. I remember hugging her because I thought she was crying for me. Now I wonder if she was crying because guilt has a smell, and sometimes even the people wearing it can't stand it. But back then, she was my savior. She kept my parents' photos in the hallway. She celebrated my birthdays. She showed up to parent-teacher conferences. She cried when I graduated high school. Uncle Paul taught me how to drive. Megan helped me pick out clothes for my first school dance. Josh and I fought like brothers, made up like brothers, and eventually drifted apart like brothers too. To anyone outside the house, we were a beautiful story. A tragedy softened by family love. People loved saying it. It made them comfortable. Poor Ethan lost everything, but at least Linda and Paul stepped up. At church, people praised them. At school events, people praised them. Even I praised them. When I won a scholarship in high school, I gave a small speech and thanked them for choosing me when they didn't have to. Aunt Linda cried in the front row. Uncle Paul looked down and wiped his eyes. The whole room clapped. I thought they were emotional because they loved me. Now I know people can cry for many reasons. Sometimes people cry because they are touched. Sometimes because they are proud. And sometimes because the lie has become so beautiful that even they almost believe it. When I turned 18, I asked about my parents' estate. Not because I wanted money. I was just curious. I knew my father had worked for a small engineering firm. I knew my mother had been a nurse. We weren't rich, but we had owned a house. There had been life insurance, I assumed. Maybe savings. Maybe something. Aunt Linda looked uncomfortable when I asked. Uncle Paul took over. Your parents had debts, Ethan, he said. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, holding a glass of orange juice, suddenly feeling childish for asking. Debts? He nodded. Mortgage. Medical bills. Funeral costs. Legal fees. We handled all of it so you wouldn't have to carry that burden. Aunt Linda reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You were a child. We wanted you to just be a child. That sounded loving. So I accepted it. What about the house? I asked. Paul sighed. It had to be sold. There wasn't much left after everything cleared. I nodded slowly. Then I said the thing that would define the next 12 years of my life. I'm sorry you had to deal with all that. Linda's eyes softened. Oh, sweetheart. She hugged me. And I felt guilty for making them talk about money. That's how good they were. They could take from me and still make me feel like I owed them an apology. After that, I worked hard to never ask for too much. In college, I chose a state school because it was cheaper. I worked part-time. I took out loans. Whenever Aunt Linda offered to send a little money, I refused unless I was desperate. I didn't want to be a burden. That word lived inside me. Burden. I had been a burden at 10. Another mouth. Another bedroom. Another broken child placed in the middle of a family that had not asked for him. They never said that. Not directly. But gratitude has a shadow. The more people remind you what they did for you, the more you begin to wonder what you cost them. And my family had a way of reminding me gently. At Thanksgiving, Linda would say, "Remember when you first came to us and wouldn't eat anything but cereal?" Everyone would laugh. At Christmas, Paul would say, "This house got a lot louder after Ethan moved in." He would smile when he said it. Everyone would smile. And I would smile too. But under the joke was always the reminder. They took me in. They adjusted. They sacrificed. They saved me. So I became the easiest person in the family. I didn't complain. I didn't ask for help. I said yes to everything. When Megan needed help moving apartments, I drove 6 hours. When Josh got arrested for a stupid bar fight at 23, I sent money for a lawyer because Linda called crying. When Uncle Paul's truck broke down, I loaned him $3,000. When Aunt Linda needed help fixing the roof, I spent 2 weekends there, climbing ladders and pretending I wasn't exhausted. Every time, they thanked me with the same sentence. "We knew we could count on you." That sentence used to make me proud. Now it makes my stomach turn. Because they weren't counting on me. They were collecting on an investment. The first crack in the story appeared 2 weeks before my 30th birthday. I was living in Chicago by then, working as a project manager for a construction company. I had a decent apartment. A decent salary. A life that looked stable from the outside. But I still carried my family like a second job. Weekly calls with Aunt Linda. Monthly family dinners when I could make the drive. Group texts. Birthday gifts. Emergency loans that were somehow never called loans out loud. Then one afternoon, I received a letter from a law office in my hometown. At first, I thought it was junk mail. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, with my full legal name printed across the front. Ethan James Miller. Not Ethan J. Miller. Not Ethan Miller. My full name. I opened it over the kitchen counter while eating leftover pasta from a plastic container. Inside was a formal letter from someone named Thomas Greer, attorney at law. It said he represented the estate of my late grandfather, Arthur Miller. My father's father. I barely remembered Grandpa Arthur. He had died when I was 11, less than a year after my parents. I remembered a stern man with silver hair, a cane, and a voice that sounded like gravel. He had come to my parents' funeral and stood near the casket without speaking. After I moved in with Linda and Paul, I only saw him twice. Both times were strange. He looked at me like he wanted to say something but didn't know how. Then he died. According to the letter, my grandfather had established a trust in my name before his death. A trust that matured when I turned 30. I read that line 6 times. A trust. In my name. Matured at 30. The pasta went cold in my hand. The letter requested that I contact the attorney immediately to confirm my identity and schedule a meeting. My first emotion wasn't excitement. It was confusion. Then fear. Then guilt. Because if there had been a trust, why had nobody told me? Maybe Aunt Linda didn't know. Maybe Uncle Paul didn't know. Maybe it was small. Maybe it was complicated. Maybe I was misunderstanding the letter completely. That's what I told myself. People raised in guilt often explain away red flags before anyone else has to. I called Aunt Linda that evening. She answered cheerfully. "Hi, sweetheart." I almost brought up the letter immediately. But something stopped me. I don't know what. Maybe instinct. Maybe the tone of the letter. Maybe the sudden memory of Uncle Paul saying, there wasn't much left after everything cleared. Instead, I asked about her garden. She talked for 15 minutes about tomatoes. Then about Megan's promotion. Then about Josh's new girlfriend. Then she said, casually, "So, are you coming home for your birthday weekend?" "I'm not sure yet." "Oh, Ethan. You have to. 30 is a big one." "I know. We are planning something special." "Special how?" She laughed. "If I told you, it wouldn't be special." I smiled automatically. But my stomach tightened. After we hung up, I called the law office. Mr. Greer himself answered. His voice was calm and old-fashioned. I told him I had received a letter. He asked me to verify a few details. Then he went quiet for a second. "Mr. Miller, I've been trying to reach you directly for some time." "For some time?" "Yes. Earlier notices were sent to your family residence. My aunt and uncle's house. That was the address on file while you were a minor." I leaned against the counter. "I never received anything." A pause. "I see." The way he said it told me he saw more than I did. I asked, "What exactly is this about?" He said, "It would be better discussed in person. But in simple terms, your grandfather placed certain assets in trust for you. There are conditions, documents, and decisions that need to be reviewed now that you are approaching the distribution date." "How much are we talking about?" He paused again. Enough that you should have independent counsel before signing anything presented by anyone else. Signing anything. The words landed strangely. Why would someone present me with something to sign? Mr. Greer's voice became careful. Mr. Miller, have you recently been approached about restructuring family property, transferring rights, or assigning financial authority? My skin went cold. No, then please do not sign anything before our meeting. I hung up and sat in silence for a long time. Then I opened my laptop and started searching old county property records. I didn't know exactly what I was doing. I typed my parents' names. My grandfather's name. My own name. Most of the records were confusing. Parcel numbers. Transfer dates. Legal descriptions. But one thing stood out. The house I grew up in with my parents had not been sold after the accident. Not immediately. It had been transferred into a trust. The same trust named in the letter. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. My childhood home. The house Uncle Paul said had been sold to pay debts. It had not been sold. At least not the way he said. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I called in sick and drove 3 hours to meet Mr. Greer. His office was on the second floor of an old brick building downtown, the kind with creaky stairs and framed certificates on the wall. He was in his 70s, neatly dressed, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He shook my hand and said, "You look like your father." Nobody had said that to me in years. For a moment, I couldn't speak. He invited me to sit. Then he opened a folder thick enough to look like a court case. "Your grandfather was not an easy man," he said. "But he was very clear about one thing. He wanted your father's share of the family assets protected for you." "My father's share?" He nodded. "Your father was Arthur's only son. Your Aunt Linda is your mother's sister, correct?" "Yes." "So she is not part of the Miller side by blood." I had never thought about it like that. To me, family was family. But legally, apparently, names mattered. Bloodlines mattered. Paper mattered. Mr. Greer explained slowly. My grandfather owned several properties, including farmland outside town, 2 rental houses, and investment accounts. When my parents died, my father's portion would have eventually passed to me. Because I was a child, my grandfather created a trust. He appointed a professional trustee at first, but after his death, certain management rights had shifted. There had been petitions, requests, expense reimbursements, guardian claims. My head spun. Guardian claims. Mr. Greer folded his hands. Your aunt and uncle submitted claims for your care. I blinked. What does that mean? It means they were reimbursed from trust assets for expenses related to raising you. I almost laughed because I thought I had misheard him. They were paid. Reimbursed. How much? He hesitated. Then he turned a page around and slid it toward me. I looked down. My chest tightened. The number wasn't small. It wasn't even close to small. 4 years, Aunt Linda and Uncle Paul had told people they sacrificed for me. But according to those documents, the trust had paid them every month. Housing allowance. Education allowance. Food and clothing allowance. Medical reimbursements. Transportation expenses. Counseling costs. Even emotional support and supervision fees, whatever that meant. I felt like the floor had shifted beneath the chair. They told me I was a burden, I whispered. Mr. Greer's expression softened. Did they? Not in those words. But yes. In every other way. I looked up. Why didn't anyone tell me? You were supposed to be informed at 21. I wasn't. I can see that. He showed me copies of letters sent to the family address. Some had been signed as received. Not by me. By Linda. My aunt had signed for letters about my trust and never told me. For 9 years. 9 years. I asked, what happens at 30? The main restrictions lift. You gain direct decision-making authority over the trust assets. You may keep them managed, liquidate certain holdings, restructure, or designate beneficiaries. How much is it worth? He gave me a number. I stopped breathing for a second. Not because I suddenly felt rich. Because in one instant, 20 years of family behavior rearranged itself in my mind. The guilt. The gratitude. The reminders. The loans. The emergencies. The way they always pulled me back whenever I got independent. The birthday weekend. We are planning something special. I asked Mr. Greer, could they access it without me? Not easily. Not now. But they may attempt to persuade you to sign authority over to them, or agree to a restructuring. I remembered his words from the phone. Do not sign anything. My mouth went dry. What kind of restructuring? He pulled another page from the folder. This was sent to my office by another attorney last month for preliminary review. I looked at the document. At the top, it said, Miller Family Asset Consolidation Agreement. My name was listed as primary beneficiary. Aunt Linda and Uncle Paul were listed as proposed family managers. Megan and Josh were listed as secondary beneficiaries. I stared at those names. My cousins. My siblings, I used to call them. Already written into a plan for money I had not even known existed. Mr. Greer said, I did not approve or participate in this. But it tells me they intended to discuss it with you soon. My birthday weekend. The special surprise. I suddenly felt sick. What does this agreement do? In plain language, it would place practical control of your trust assets under a family-managed entity. You would still technically benefit, but decision-making would move away from you. It would also create future claims for your aunt, uncle, and cousins. So they'd get my inheritance. Eventually, yes. Possibly sooner, depending on how distributions were structured. I leaned back. For 20 years, they had loved me. Or acted like it. For 20 years, they had hugged me, raised me, celebrated me, comforted me. And behind all of it, this had been waiting. A date. My 30th birthday. The day I became useful in a new way. Mr. Greer watched me carefully. I know this is difficult. I laughed once, quietly. Difficult was too small a word. Difficult was a flat tire. Difficult was a bad breakup. This felt like discovering the house you lived in had been a stage set, and everyone else had the script. I asked him for copies of everything. He gave them to me. Before I left, he said, Mr. Miller, one more thing. I turned. Do not confront them alone if you feel unsafe. I almost said, they would never hurt me. But the words died in my throat. Because 24 hours earlier, I would have said they would never lie to me either. On the drive home, my phone rang. Aunt Linda. I let it ring. Then Megan. Then Josh. Then Uncle Paul. By the time I reached my apartment, the family group chat had exploded. Linda, Ethan, call me when you can. Megan, Mom says you're being weird. Everything okay? Josh, birthday boy ignoring us now. Paul, need to talk. Important. I stared at the messages. For the first time in my life, I didn't answer immediately. That sounds small. It wasn't. In my family, fast replies were proof of loyalty. Silence was rebellion. So I rebelled. I spent the next 2 days reading documents. Every page hurt in a new way. There were records of payments made to Linda and Paul during my childhood. Some were reasonable. School fees, medical costs, clothing. But others made my hands shake. Vacation reimbursement. Home improvement expenses justified as environmental stability for minor child. Vehicle purchase assistance because transportation was necessary for dependent care. A kitchen renovation partially reimbursed from my trust because, according to the claim, the child requires safe and functional meal preparation space. I remembered that kitchen renovation. Aunt Linda cried because it was her dream kitchen. Uncle Paul joked that I better enjoy those granite countertops because they cost him a fortune. They didn't cost him a fortune. They cost me. I found records of money withdrawn around my 18th birthday. Around my high school graduation. Around my college move-in. All times when they gave speeches about sacrifice. I found correspondence where they argued that I was emotionally dependent and should not be informed too soon about the trust because it might destabilize his sense of family and responsibility. My sense of family and responsibility. Meaning, if I knew the truth, I might stop feeling indebted to them. And then I found the worst thing. A letter from Aunt Linda to the former trustee, dated 3 months after my parents died. I almost didn't read it. Part of me wanted to stop. Part of me knew there are some truths that once you read them, they live in your body forever. But I read it. Linda wrote that taking me in had caused unexpected financial and emotional strain. She requested increased monthly compensation. Then, near the bottom, she wrote, "While we love Ethan and are committed to providing him with a stable home, it should be understood that this responsibility has long-term consequences for our own children's futures. We believe Megan and Josh should not be disadvantaged because we chose to care for Ethan." I stared at that sentence. We chose to care for Ethan. Megan and Josh should not be disadvantaged. There it was. The original sin. I was never simply a child grieving his parents. I was a responsibility. A cost. A calculation. And their children were the ones who deserved protection from me. That night, I sat on my apartment floor surrounded by papers and cried harder than I had cried since I was 10. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just broken. I cried for my parents. I cried for the boy who thought the blue bedroom meant he was wanted. I cried for every thank you speech I had given. I cried for every time I had apologized for needing anything. I cried because I realized love had been mixed with accounting from the beginning. The birthday weekend was 3 days away. I could have cancelled. I should have cancelled. But something in me needed to see their faces. I needed to know if, when the moment came, they would choose me. Just once. Maybe that sounds pathetic. Maybe it was. But betrayal doesn't kill hope immediately. Hope is stubborn. It begs for one last explanation. One last misunderstanding. One last chance to prove that the people you loved were not what the evidence says they are. So I went. Aunt Linda's house looked exactly the same when I pulled into the driveway. The porch swing. The flower baskets. The welcome mat that said "Family gathers here." I almost laughed at that. Linda opened the door before I knocked. "Ethan." She hugged me tightly. She smelled like vanilla perfume and laundry detergent. A smell I had associated with comfort for 20 years. I stood stiffly for half a second, then hugged her back. Old habits are humiliating. Uncle Paul clapped me on the shoulder. There he is. 30 years old. Making us all feel ancient. Megan appeared from the kitchen with a glass of wine. Josh came in from the backyard, grinning. The house was decorated with balloons. Photos of me were taped along the wall. Me at 11 holding a fishing pole. Me at 13 in a Halloween costume. Me at 16 beside Uncle Paul's truck. Me at 18 in a graduation gown. Me at 22 with Megan at her college graduation. Me at 28 holding Josh's baby daughter. A life displayed like evidence of love. For a moment, I almost doubted everything again. Because how could people fake that much? How could every smile be a lie? Then Aunt Linda said, "We have such a special weekend planned." And the doubt disappeared. Dinner was my favorite meal. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, lemon cake. Linda kept touching my arm. Megan kept asking about work. Josh joked too much. Uncle Paul drank more than usual. Everyone seemed slightly too bright. Like actors waiting for their cue. After dinner, Paul cleared his throat. Well, before cake, we wanted to talk as a family. There it was. Linda smiled nervously. Nothing bad, sweetheart. Actually, something wonderful. Megan reached under the side table and pulled out a folder. My folder. Not literally, but I knew. My name was on the tab. Ethan. Just Ethan. Not Mr. Miller. Not legal name. Just the family version. Paul said, "You know we've always tried to look out for you." I nodded slowly. He continued, "Now that you're turning 30, there are some financial things from your grandfather's side that are going to come up." I kept my face blank. "Oh?" Linda leaned forward. "We didn't want to overwhelm you before." Megan said, "It's kind of complicated." Josh added, "Legal stuff. Boring." Paul gave him a look, then smiled at me. "There's a trust. Not huge, but enough to require responsibility." Not huge. I almost laughed. Linda said, "Your grandfather was very old-fashioned. He set things up in a way that could create division if we are not careful." Division. That word was doing a lot of work. Paul opened the folder and pulled out papers. "So we talked to someone who helped us create a plan that keeps everything in the family and prevents stress from falling on you." There it was. The real plan, dressed up as protection. I asked, "What kind of plan?" Megan smiled softly. "Basically, family management. You'd still be taken care of, obviously." "Obviously." Josh said, "And the properties wouldn't have to be split up or sold to strangers." I looked at him. "What properties?" He froze. Paul quickly said, "Just some old holdings. Nothing glamorous." I nodded. "And I would sign this." Linda's eyes brightened. "Only after reviewing it, of course." Megan slid the papers toward me. "We all just think this is the healthiest thing." The healthiest thing. I stared at the document. The same one Mr. Greer had shown me. Only this copy had little sticky tabs where my signature was required. 6 tabs. 6 places where they wanted me to hand over my life, while they watched me eat birthday cake. I looked around the room. At the woman who had tucked me into bed. At the man who had taught me to drive. At the cousin who called herself my sister. At the cousin who named me godfather to his daughter. And I gave them one last chance. I asked, quietly, "How long have you known about the trust?" Silence. Small. Sharp. Linda blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean exactly what I asked." Paul's face hardened slightly. We've known there were some arrangements. We handled them because you were a child. I'm 30 now. That's why we are discussing it. No, I said. I mean, when did you plan to tell me everything? Megan crossed her arms. We are telling you. Everything. Josh muttered, here we go. I looked at him. What does that mean? He shook his head. Nothing. Paul leaned back. Ethan, don't turn this into something ugly. There it was. The warning. Stay grateful. Stay soft. Stay easy. I reached into my bag and pulled out the copies from Mr. Greer's office. I placed them on the table. Linda's face went pale. Paul stopped moving. Megan looked from the documents to me. Josh whispered, oh, hell. I said, I met with the trust attorney. No one spoke. I know about the properties. I know about the payments. I know about the letters. I know you received notices for years and signed for them. Linda's eyes filled with tears instantly. Ethan, no. Not yet. She closed her mouth. I turned to Paul. You told me my parents' house was sold to pay debts. His jaw tightened. You were 18. You wouldn't have understood. I understood English. It was complicated. You lied. He slammed his hand lightly on the table. We protected you. That sentence lit something in me. No, I said. You protected yourselves from me knowing I wasn't dependent on you. Linda started crying harder. Megan said, that's not fair. I looked at her. Did you know? She hesitated too long. That was the answer. I nodded. Okay. Ethan, I didn't know everything. You knew enough to put your name in the agreement. Her face flushed. That was Mom and Dad's idea. But you didn't remove it. She looked away. Josh stood up. This is insane. You're acting like we are criminals because our parents got reimbursed for raising you. I slowly turned to him. Reimbursed? Yes, reimbursed. Do you think kids are free? The room went completely still. Even Paul looked at him like he had said too much. Josh didn't stop. You came into our house and everything changed. Mom was stressed all the time. Dad had to work more. Megan had to share everything. I had to share my room when relatives visited because you had the guest room permanently. And now you're shocked there was money involved. There it was. 20 years of resentment finally saying its real name. I looked at the boy who once gave me half his action figures. He was gone. Maybe he had been gone for a long time. I said, I was 10. My parents were dead. Josh's face flickered. But pride is faster than shame. He said, and we all had to live with that. That sentence hit me so hard I almost sat back. We all had to live with that. Like my grief had been an inconvenience that happened to them. Linda sobbed, Josh, stop. But I was glad he said it. Cruelty is sometimes a gift when it stops pretending. I gathered the papers slowly. Paul spoke in a low voice. Ethan, sit down. We can still discuss this like adults. I am discussing it like an adult. No, you're emotional. I smiled faintly. That old trick. If I was calm, I was cold. If I was upset, I was emotional. Either way, they didn't have to listen. I said, I'm not signing anything. Linda whispered, please don't do this. Do what? Tear the family apart. I looked around the room. The balloons. The photos. The cake waiting on the counter. The signature tabs. You planned this birthday party around taking control of my inheritance. Paul stood. That inheritance exists because we raised you responsibly. I stared at him. You were paid to raise me. Linda flinched like I slapped her. Paul's voice sharpened. Not enough. That was the moment. Not the letter. Not the documents. Not Josh's anger. That sentence. Not enough. 20 years of hugs, birthdays, school pickups, family vacations, and Sunday dinners collapsed into 2 words. Not enough. I nodded slowly. Thank you. Paul frowned. For what? For finally telling the truth. I walked toward the door. Linda followed me. Ethan, please. You're my son. I stopped. For 20 years, I had wanted her to say that. Not nephew. Not poor Ethan. Not the boy we took in. Son. And now she said it because I was leaving with my signature. I turned around. No, I said quietly. I was your investment. Her face broke. Maybe from guilt. Maybe from fear. Maybe because the investment was walking out. I didn't stay to find out. Driving away from that house felt like leaving my childhood twice. The first time, I left because my parents died. The second time, I left because the family that replaced them had never been what I thought. For the next few weeks, they tried everything. Aunt Linda sent long messages about love. Uncle Paul sent practical messages about taxes, property maintenance, and how I was not prepared to handle things alone. Megan sent voice notes crying. Josh sent one text that said, "You're proving Dad right." I didn't ask what he meant. I already knew. They thought I was selfish, ungrateful, dangerous with my own life. The family story changed quickly. Relatives called. Some gently. Some aggressively. Ethan, I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding. Linda and Paul gave up so much for you. Money changes people. Don't let greed destroy family. That last one made me laugh until I felt sick. Greed. I had not known the trust existed 3 weeks earlier. They had built legal structures around it. But I was greedy because I refused to sign. People love calling you greedy when you stop being profitable to them. Mr. Greer helped me secure everything properly. I hired my own financial advisor. I reviewed every asset. The trust was valuable, yes, but not fantasy rich. It was land, rental income, investments, and my parents' old house, which had been rented out for years. My parents' house. I visited it on a cold Sunday morning. The current tenants were moving out, and the property manager let me walk through after they left. The house was smaller than I remembered. Childhood does that. It makes rooms huge and adults permanent. The living room still had the fireplace where my mother hung stockings. The kitchen had different cabinets. The backyard fence was new. But my bedroom window was the same. I stood in the doorway of the room where I had slept as a boy before everything changed. There were no toys. No posters. No trace of me. But for a second, I could see it. My father kneeling by the bed, teaching me how to say a prayer even though he was not religious. My mother opening the curtains on Saturday morning. Me hiding under the blanket, pretending to still be asleep. I sat on the floor. And for the first time in 20 years, I said out loud, I want to come home. Not to the house, exactly. To myself. To the boy who got buried under gratitude. To the life that should have been protected. To the truth that had waited patiently under layers of other people's stories. I decided not to sell the house. Everyone expected me to. Paul especially. He sent an email through his lawyer offering to assist in liquidation strategy. I ignored it. Instead, I renovated slowly. Nothing extravagant. New paint. New floors. Repairs. I kept the fireplace. I kept the old maple tree in the backyard. I kept the marks on the garage wall where my father had measured my height. They were faint, but still there. Ethan, age 6. Ethan, age 7. Ethan, age 8. Ethan, age 9. Then nothing. After 10, my growth moved to another house. A house where every inch of me had a hidden cost. One afternoon, while cleaning out the attic of my parents' house, I found a box the property manager had saved from storage. It had my father's name on it. Inside were old tax files, photographs, and a small stack of letters tied with string. Most were from my grandfather to my father. But one envelope was addressed to me. Ethan, when he is old enough. My hands shook before I opened it. The letter was from my father. Not long. Just 1 page. He had written it when I was 9 months before the accident. Ethan, your mom says writing letters like this is dramatic, but I think every father should leave his son a few words, just in case life is unfair. If you are reading this when you are older, I hope you know 3 things. First, you were wanted from the beginning. Second, you do not owe anyone your life just because they helped you through part of it. Third, family is not proven by what people say when everything is easy. Family is proven by what they protect when you have no power. I hope I am there to tell you these things myself. But if I am not, believe them anyway. Love, Dad. I read that letter sitting on a dusty attic floor with sunlight coming through the vent, and I cried like a child. Because my father, dead for 20 years, had somehow given me the sentence I needed most. You were wanted from the beginning. That became the anchor. Whenever Linda texted that she missed me, I remembered. You were wanted from the beginning. Whenever Paul claimed I was being manipulated by lawyers, I remembered. You do not owe anyone your life. Whenever relatives said family is family, I remembered. Family is proven by what they protect when you have no power. And when I had no power, Linda and Paul protected the money better than they protected the truth. Months passed. The legal review uncovered more than I expected. Some reimbursements had been excessive, but technically approved. Some were questionable. Some crossed lines. Mr. Greer told me litigation could take years and drain my peace. I had to decide what I wanted. Revenge sounds clean in stories. In real life, revenge has invoices. Lawyer fees. Depositions. Emails. Nights spent rereading things that reopen the wound. I didn't want to spend the next decade fighting people who had already stolen enough of my life. So I chose boundaries and recovery over total war. That doesn't mean I let everything go. I forced corrections where I could. I removed them from all authority. I blocked future claims. I required formal accounting. I made sure every legal door they had used was closed. Then I walked away. Not because they deserved peace. Because I did. Aunt Linda came to my apartment once. She didn't warn me. I opened the door and found her standing there with a casserole dish. For a second, I was 15 again. She used to bring casseroles when someone was sick, grieving, or angry. Food was her apology language. The problem was, she often used it instead of accountability. "Hi, sweetheart," she said. I didn't invite her in. Her eyes moved past me into my apartment. "You changed the place. You've never been here." She looked hurt. That was another thing she did well. Look hurt when confronted with the consequences of her choices. She held out the dish. I made your favorite. I looked at it. Chicken and rice casserole. The kind she made when I first moved in. Back then, I thought it tasted like safety. Now it looked like bait. I'm not hungry. Her lips trembled. Ethan, please. I stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind me. What do you want? She looked smaller than I remembered. Older. For the first time, I noticed the lines around her mouth, the grey in her hair, the tiredness that wasn't entirely fake. I want my family back, she said. I nodded. Which version? She blinked. What? The version where I didn't know. Or the version where you tell the truth. Tears filled her eyes. I loved you. I believed her. That was the worst part. I believed she loved me in some way. But love mixed with exploitation is not safe love. It is not enough to love someone emotionally while harming them practically. It is not enough to hug a child at night and steal his truth in the morning. I said, maybe you did. She started crying harder. I did. I do. Then why didn't you tell me? She wiped her face. Because I was scared. Of what? Of losing you. I stared at her. No. You were scared of losing access. She shook her head quickly. No, yes. She looked away. And in that silence, I heard the closest thing to confession I would ever get. I asked, did you ever plan to tell me? She whispered, when the time was right. I almost smiled. When would that have been? She didn't answer. Because we both knew. Never. The right time was never. Not while the money could still be controlled. Not while my guilt was still useful. Not while the family story still worked. I said, you let me believe I owed you for raising me. She sobbed. It was hard, Ethan. I know. And you were paid. It wasn't just about money. But money was there. She looked at me with desperate eyes. We gave you a home. I nodded slowly. You gave me a home and a debt at the same time. Do you understand what that does to a child? Her face crumpled. I wanted, for one dangerous second, to comfort her. To say it was okay. To take the casserole. To let the old rhythm return. Because grief makes familiar pain look tempting. But I didn't. I said, I can't be your son when it helps you and your asset when it benefits you. She closed her eyes. I'm sorry. It was the first clean apology she had given. No, but. No, you have to understand. Just sorry. And still, it didn't fix anything. That is another truth people don't like. An apology can be real and still arrive too late to restore access. I said, I need you to leave. She nodded. She took the casserole with her. I went back inside and sat on the floor by the door for almost an hour. Not because I doubted my decision. Because doing the right thing can still hurt like hell. Megan was different. She didn't show up with food. She sent a letter. An actual handwritten letter. I almost threw it away. Then I opened it. She wrote that she had known about the trust since she was 19. She said her parents framed it as family fairness. They told her that because I would eventually receive assets, she and Josh deserved to be included too. Since they had shared their parents with me. That phrase made me pause. Shared their parents. I hated it. But I also understood how a teenager could absorb that poison if fed slowly enough. Megan admitted she had been jealous of me. Not because I got more love. Because my tragedy made me untouchable. She wrote, I thought you got everyone's sympathy, and I didn't understand that sympathy is not the same as safety. That sentence stayed with me. She apologized without asking for forgiveness. She said she had removed herself from any agreement involving the trust. She said she was starting therapy. She said, "I don't expect you to call me. I just wanted one honest thing to exist between us." I didn't call. But I kept the letter. Josh never apologized. Not really. He doubled down. Online, in family circles, anywhere someone would listen, he told people I got rich and abandoned the family who raised me. He called me ungrateful. He called me cold. He called me brainwashed by lawyers. At first, I wanted to defend myself. I drafted messages. Long ones. With dates, numbers, scanned documents. I wanted everyone to understand. Then my therapist asked me, "What would it cost you to convince people committed to misunderstanding you?" The answer was simple. Too much. So I stopped. Let Josh have the people who preferred his version. Let Linda have the sympathy of relatives who never asked for facts. Let Paul have his pride. I had my father's letter. I had the trust documents. I had the truth. And for the first time, that was enough. On my 31st birthday, I did not go to Linda's house. There were no balloons. No family photos taped to walls. No cake beside signature pages. Instead, I spent the morning at my parents' house. My house now, technically. But I still thought of it as theirs. I had moved in 2 months earlier. Not permanently at first. Then slowly, my things found places. My books on the shelves. My coffee mug in the cabinet. My jacket by the door. Life returning one object at a time. That evening, I invited 3 friends over. Not family. Friends. People who had never guilted me into proving my love. People who brought food without keeping score. People who asked how I was and listened to the answer. We ate pizza on the living room floor because my dining table hadn't arrived yet. Someone brought a cheap cake from the grocery store. They sang terribly. I laughed harder than I had in months. After they left, I stood by the fireplace and looked at the birthday candles burned down on the plate. 31. 1 year after the real plan. 1 year after the truth. 1 year after I stopped being grateful for being deceived. My phone buzzed. A message from Aunt Linda. "Happy birthday, Ethan. I love you. I hope someday you remember the good years too." I read it several times. The good years. That was the complicated part. There were good years. There were good moments. There were hugs that felt real. Dinners that felt warm. Vacations where we laughed. Sicknesses where she cared for me. Graduations where Paul looked proud. Memories that did not disappear just because the foundation cracked. For a long time, I thought I had to choose. Either they loved me, or they used me. Either my childhood was real, or it was fake. Either I was grateful, or I was angry. Healing taught me life is crueler and more complicated than that. Sometimes people love you and still use you. Sometimes a home can shelter you and condition you at the same time. Sometimes the good years were good, and the betrayal was still betrayal. I typed back one sentence. I remember everything now. Then I blocked her number. Not forever, maybe. But for then. And then was all I could handle. I walked upstairs to the room that used to be mine. The paint was new. The floorboards still creaked in the same spot. On the wall, I had framed my father's letter. Not because I wanted visitors to see it. Because I needed to. Every morning. Every night. Until the truth became stronger than the old guilt. You were wanted from the beginning. I wish I could end this story by saying I never missed them again. But I did. I missed Linda when I got sick and wanted soup. I missed Paul when my sink leaked and I didn't know how to fix it. I missed Megan when I saw stupid celebrity gossip we would have laughed about. I even missed Josh sometimes, usually when a football game was on and something ridiculous happened. That's what people don't understand about cutting ties. You don't just lose the bad. You lose the familiar. You lose your emergency contacts. You lose your holiday table. You lose people who know your childhood stories, even if they weaponize them. You lose the version of yourself who belongs somewhere. But sometimes belonging is too expensive. Sometimes the price is your dignity. Sometimes the price is your truth. Sometimes the price is signing your name on a document that turns your life into a family resource. And I had paid enough. So when people ask me now if I hate them, I say no. Hate would keep me tied to them. I don't hate them. I see them. That is worse for them and better for me. I see Aunt Linda as a woman who could love a child and still lie to him for 20 years. I see Uncle Paul as a man who called control protection because it sounded nobler. I see Megan as someone trying, maybe too late, to become honest. I see Josh as someone who may never forgive me for surviving without needing him. And I see myself differently too. Not as the burden. Not as the lucky orphan. Not as the grateful nephew. Not as the adopted son, who should never ask questions. I see myself as the child my parents loved. The grandson my grandfather tried to protect. The man who almost signed away his future for one more night of belonging. And the man who didn't. If you are listening to this because something in your family feels wrong, I want you to hear me clearly. Love should not require confusion. Love should not come with secret paperwork. Love should not make you feel guilty for asking what is true. If people call you family only when they need your silence, your money, your signature, or your obedience, that is not love. That is management. And you are not an asset. You are not a debt. You are not proof of someone else's sacrifice. You are allowed to know your own story. You are allowed to read the documents. You are allowed to ask why. You are allowed to walk away from people who raised you if raising you became their excuse to own you. My family acted loving for 20 years. Some of that love may have been real. That is what makes it hurt. But behind the love, there was a plan. A plan made of signatures, silence, guilt, and timing. They waited for my 30th birthday like it was a harvest. They decorated the house. They cooked my favorite meal. They put candles on a cake. And beside that cake, they placed the papers that would have taken what my parents left for me. They thought love would make me sign. They thought gratitude would keep me blind. They thought the little boy they took in was still desperate enough to trade his future for a place at their table. They were wrong. Because that little boy grew up. He opened the letter. He read the truth. He walked out before dessert. And for the first time in 20 years, he went home.